Welcome, everybody. This is Avoiding the Addiction Affliction, brought to you by Westwards Consulting and the Kenosha County Substance Use Disorder Coalition. I'm Mike McGowan. In the work that I've done, there's no greater pay-it-forward group than those in recovery. Making a difference is what drives our guest today. Jake Jansen is the executive director, and Douglas Darby, the marketing director, and both of them are co-founders for Turning the Page. Turning the Page was created by these two men to bring different educational programs into communities through connection, speaking, and media resources, in which the focus is on mental health, substance use disorders, connections, behavioral change, and hope. Both Jake and Douglas have a story that got them where they are today, and we're going to discuss that and their current mission through Turning the Page. Welcome, guys.
Hey, thanks for having us, Mike.
Well,
Pleasure.
I'm so glad. This is like speaking to a brotherhood. We do the same thing, but let's go backwards first. You don't just start Turning the Page without a story. So let's start there. Jake, give us the short version, I suppose, of your recovery story.
Sure. Yeah. When Doug usually do this, we have about an hour just to
I
tell our
know,
life
I know.
story. So we're going to do the abbreviated version. I grew up in New Berlin, Mike. You know my parents. I came from a really good middle class family. I was raised correctly. My parents still have bottles of alcohol in their cabinets from their wedding 44 years ago. And, for me, I grew up, I was a scholar athlete, and I always felt like I was bullied and picked on a lot. And being bullied and picked on led me to this group of individuals that were using drugs and alcohol. And I started using. I was very smart, so I really had that ability to live that double life. I'd go out and use after school, marijuana, alcohol, and then I would come back, do my homework, and do just fine. As I got a little bit older, I became a hedge fund manager in Milwaukee, trading about $1 billion a week through my hands. I got addicted to Oxycontin. I thought doctors prescribed pharmaceuticals, they were very safe. Eventually, all of that kind of fell apart. I got addicted to IV heroin for 4.5 years and eventually was facing 57 and a half years in prison. I ended up going to a place called Nova in Oshkosh that really saved my life. They told me that I had to get clean and stay clean, and that had to be my first priority. So I started building businesses around it. And the first business that I built was something called My Recovery Project, and it was really about doing interventions and then life coaching individuals and getting as much education I could help myself as well. I took a coaching class, and it really changed my perspective on life from being the victim to the creator of my own circumstance. From there, I built addiction recovery environment homes, sober living homes for women. From there, I built the Ladders Recovery Community in Oconomowoc. It was a 30-bed licensed treatment facility, hired all 17 employees. And then shortly after that, we formed Rise Together. I'm sorry, we formed Turning the Page. Doug's old company was Rise Together. And we saw a gap and a need and decided we wanted to do prevention because for a while, I was saving kids that had fallen into the river, right? People were falling in, they were drowning, and we're helping them downstream. And we really realized that we could make a much bigger impact in prevention. So as some of those back end services I started selling away, I was able to start focusing a lot more on prevention services. And that's really where Doug and I have excelled and found a passion for what we do.
Wow. How long you been in recovery, Jake?
July 19th, 2010 from IV heroin addiction.
Wow.
So
Doug,
a little over 14 years now.
wow. How about you, Douglas?
September 10th of 2010. So that's one of the great things about Jake and I is we were passing in the night on so
Right.
many of our big celebratory dates, also our active use. It was really exciting to be able to work with Jake and really see those stories come to life. I mean, when Jake and I started, it was one of those things where I knew that I wanted to work with this individual. I knew from everything that I'd seen, from the way that he treated people in addiction, to the help that he provided. This was the guy, this is someone that I chose to work with. And it was because of not only those great ideas, but just how that natural connection happened on stage. I mean, it was one of those aha moments, I guess you would say, where
Mhm.
and we still have them completely. But I think that's what the beauty of it is really identifying with someone that complemented maybe even a lot of your weaknesses, or I complemented his weaknesses, and we saw it, we hit the ground running, and I think it really entered like that confidence building era of our adulthood.
We are so different, but on stage we intertwine so well. We feed off of each other, we back each other up. And one of the really cool things is I've always been looking for connection all my life. A lot of my addiction started from being bullied and not fitting in school. And when Doug met me at the sober houses, he said, "I want a business partner, not a friend." Last night he stayed over at my house. Yeah.
Ah,
So it's
But even that was the gaining and support. You know, nobody gets into recovery and then just has these perfect lives, right? We call it turning the page. If you look at our logo, it is a sad face turning the page into a happy face. But if you look at that bottom corner, that page is turning again. And we just wanted to show people that life is tough. Life has soul crushing moments to it, but it doesn't ever take away that beauty and that understanding that you really have to take a look at the entire process, the entire ups and downs that go with it, and find appreciation in that. I appreciate it because I've had some lousy friends in the past. I've had some lousy business partners, and today I know how to honor that.
somebody called me last night and or texted me and said, "Hey, I just saw a report that opiate use is down." And I'm like, and my cynical part answered back and said, "Well, yeah, that's because those who have used are dead." And that sounds really harsh, but you both got into recovery in 2010. Fortunate that you weren't using when fentanyl was everywhere.
absolutely.
Saved our lives.
Yeah, when we were using, and if we used fentanyl, we were looking for it, and the suckers, the patches that were available to us 10 years, it wasn't put in everything. And that's one of the scary realities right now is fentanyl being cut into a lot of different substances.
Yeah, in the fentanyl that we were looking for, it was the actual prescribed method of fentanyl. When you have this, bathtub cutting that you see going on and just people taking chemistry into their own hands, it's terrifying.
Yeah, it is. I want to continue with your recovery for a minute. You talked about bad friends. We've all had them, but how many relationships were you able to repair in recovery, and how many did you just lose? And that's the cost of doing business when you get addicted.
Yeah, I had some of my friends that said, "Jake, I hope I never see you again." And they meant it in the nicest forms and fashion, because if I wasn't going to get clean, or they certainly weren't going to get clean. So if I was going to do it, I had to separate. I pushed a lot of people out of my life, some intentionally, some unintentionally. But I think, the people that always stayed by me were my parents. And when I ended up getting clean, I ended up spending a lot more time with my family, my parents. These were these individuals that were completely non-judgmental. They weren't constantly bringing it up or anything like that. So for me, it gave me, a space to recover. Additionally,
Hmm.
I've been with my wife now 22 years, 23 years. So we went through that together, and we each went to our own treatment facilities. And luckily we were able to, come back and find out that our recovery supported each other instead of being able to.
Douglas?
And for me, really, it was about setting boundaries with myself. I'm a firm believer if you don't respect the boundaries you set with yourself, you can't expect anyone else to set them or to, even go along with what you're asking. My biggest thing was I had to understand that when I got out, I had 12 years over my head. So I was terrified to go back to prison for one, but also it was just taking a look at the people that were showing up in my life. I didn't have the ability to manufacture or even keep afloat all these really fake friendships or fake relationships that I had in life. And I was the one failing the people that were good in my life. And it really just went back to that gut instinct and being genuine and true to yourself on what you wanted in making that stand.
You start to realize who your friends are when you get locked up, and who comes to visit you, who you write your letters.
I've said that for a long time, right? Oh, my buds, they'll hang with me. It's like, go to jail. Let's see how many you have, right?
Yeah. But they're right there when you get out,
Yeah.
and I think that's the biggest eye-opening thing is it's lonely to be incarcerated. It's lonely to be in addiction. And when you do have those people, because there were people on the other side of it too, people that I didn't expect to show up for me or to write me a letter, people from my past, people that were just concerned And I think those are the moments that get you through the hardest part of prison, which is loneliness. Yeah.
Yeah, they're there when you get out, but they're there with a blunt in their hand or a drink or a vial, right? It's not like they're supporting your recovery.
Yeah, and is it, but I think so much of it too was just the lack of understanding where we live in Wisconsin. So a lot of times I would hear, well, you can still drink, right?
Yeah. Oh
And,
God.
and just having to explain why I can't, or it was frustrating because it'd be like, no, I'm gonna go back. So even at the simplest, like maybe you won't understand that this will kill me, but you can understand that I'm not willing to go back for a joint.
Mm.
But I have seen it getting better though too. I think 14 years ago when we got clean, there was a less of an understanding about recovery. I've seen things over the last few years that more people are starting to identify in recovery than in active addiction. It's becoming more popular. Where when we were growing up, sobriety was never popular.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
he talks about it. I was ostracized even by the news stations. They labeled me as the Oxycontin kid or the Walgreens bandit. And I look at it where, I mean, I was guilty, don't get me wrong, but they definitely put me up there in a light where I wasn't a violent person. I wasn't a bad kid. I made some horrible mistakes, but they really stigmatized, I believe, what the main issue was.
I've got a really interesting story too that we didn't touch on too much yet. So
well, that sounds like Home Alone, the wet bandits, that's just,
Yeah, 100%.
Jake, you were involved previously in building facilities.
yeah,
Not that you want to go back to that, but they're still sorely needed today.
yeah. Absolutely. Building resources in the community is incredibly difficult on many different levels and things that I didn't really expect. As you know, the job of an interventionist, coach, a therapist is incredibly difficult on as itself. But take example, when I started building sober living homes in Waukesha, we got letters cease and desist from the city attorneys to try and shut our sober homes down. We got letters from the neighbors saying, kids are laughing in the garage at 9:30 at night. This has to be shut down. Just neighbors that never, we ran for 7 years, and I had neighbors that said hi to me when we put the for sale signs up. 7 years never came over until we put the for sale signs up. Building a treatment facility, that took me 2 years of my life in Oconomowoc, 50 to 60-hour weeks. I absolutely loved it. I built the whole thing. We turned it from an industrial shell of a building to a fully licensed CBRF, commercial with reasonable accommodation for housing under DHS 83. I hired all 17 of my employees. I had 650 colleagues come to the open house, and 8 days after open, the board of directors asked me to come in and fired me without pause and basically said an addict shouldn't run a treatment facility. We want you to sit on the board and teach us how to run this thing. And it was devastating for me. That was one of those things that I'm running some of the best sober homes in the state for 5 years. Built this amazing treatment facility that everybody's absolutely raving about, and then to lose it, I didn't understand why.
To be told you weren't good enough.
Yeah. And when I was in treatment, they told me, Jake, if you don't put your recovery first, everything else will fall apart. So I, had a mission to start building resources around this. Now, when I lost that, I didn't know why, right? I was devastated, but I had mentors and people in my life that said, Jake, you have a beautiful home, you have other successful businesses, you became a CBRF administrator, you have kids, you have a lot of positive things in your life right now. And for me, that was enough to say, you're right. I don't want to blow everything up, because that would have been the opportunity to blow everything up, go back to addiction and show them that, I was just an addict. But I said, I got all of these good things. I don't want to do that. And, a couple months later, I reached out to Doug and we formed Turning the Page. And it's been a wonderful couple of years with that.
Well,
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes, if you can get through that hurt and that black cloud of not understanding, you get to find out the reasons why things happen. And I've been seeing it all my life. I do know that the work that Jake and I do is a purpose-driven mission. I do know that I had to lose some best friends to understand what that best friend really looked like. Again, I mean, thank God these things happen. I couldn't imagine where my life would be without some of those really valuable life lessons in it. And then to be able to get through it, turn that page, if you will, and stand strong in solidarity with people that have been through things like you, regardless if we're talking addiction or not, life is tough. And you just get to really see some of those silver linings, and honestly, um, it should put some sort of, fortitude in you to knowing, calm sea never made a skilled sailor. So I think the storms for or for the seas for the stormy weather.
Well, Douglas, I got to see you when you were with Rise Together, which was really powerful. But the difference between that and what you're doing now is the prep and the follow-up.
Yeah, and even the understanding of every town that we go into is different. Every school has different needs. And we try to take that fluid approach to it where we want to pivot. We want to understand what's going on, not only in your schools and your communities, but then how can we be the cheerleaders for it? There are so many good programs that we know across the state, so many good resources. So how can we go in and how can we just help navigate that system a little bit easier? I mean, you go in to try to get someone treatment,
It's tough.
it's a maze
Yep.
to try to figure out, right? So really identifying those resources and taking some of the legwork out for the parents, school administrator, kids themselves, saying what are those individual needs that we can really highlight for you.
I absolutely love building treatment facilities. And for the first 5 years, it was an amazing amount of fun. And then the world changed in 2020, and it made something that we were really good at, connecting people to resources, to jobs, to support systems, to treatment. It made it really, really, really difficult. And COVID gave individuals a reason to isolate and disconnect from the groups. And, I started looking at it and saying, for so long, I'm catching people that are already drowning. They're sliding down these rivers of addiction, they're drowning in the rivers. And I said, we need to do something else. And that's really what kind of led me to prevention, saying we can make a far bigger impact on the front end by going into schools, doing very effective presentations, and making sure that they have those back end resources that you talk about on the back. So not only do we go into the schools and start the conversations, we keep them going with what we call our Small Talks with Jake and Doug video series. And then we continue to follow that up with our Virtual Care Navigation Center, or VCNC, which is really it's a support center for mental health and substance abuse.
Well, how low do you go? What ages do you speak to, right? And what's the goal when you do a presentation?
So we do something called our truth presentation. So we call it teaching resiliency using trust and honesty. And actually, we're speaking at the school resource officer meeting this December, and we applied next year to do the nationwide conference as a keynote. So we really believe that it can be truth and dare, and where dare hits about the fifth grade students and really starts educating them around these things, we bring in the truth more in middle school. So we kind of that seventh to ninth grade is really the target area that we like to hit, because by that point, seventh grade, the kids are curious. They do have computers in their pocket. These are smart individuals, and we want to give them real and accurate information, truthful information.
I think one of the best things about Jake and I teaming up together is we also looked at it as a community approach where we knew that if we could get in and we could work with the counties themselves, we could take off so much of that pressure and stress financially, or even just going out and saying, what do we want to bring into our schools this year? The county has taken the initiative to say, you know what, we're going to bring you in, we're going to flip that bill, and then we're going to allow you to go and offer these services for free within our community.
So
That's
rather
great.
than trying to build resources ourselves, we get to use our networking ability and our virtual care navigation to say, what are the best resources in your community? Go into the schools and talk to the social workers and therapists and say, what are you currently using? Because after the kids then hear the truth presentation, now they're coming up to us and saying, I didn't realize the importance of talking about my problems earlier in life. I didn't understand the importance of finding, healthy people, or how to find healthy, how to find
Yeah.
the ability to identify what is a resource. We see that really a big leap in our numbers. And I really think the biggest thing that it does is it keeps us in the schools. It's not this one and done flash in the pan where it allows us to come back. It allows us to follow up, whether that's small groups, one on one, or what what are we missing now? What are those next steps?
You know, I do a lot of these. You know that, the listeners know that. And kids love the stories, so I'm sure they really enjoy that. But they really connect with the hope.
Yeah. Hope's probably the biggest thing. I mean, I think hope has kept me alive more times than anything else in life.
When we do our stories, yes, we talk a little bit about, the past, what got us to those things, what the underlying causes of our addictions. We don't talk about the horror stories that we went through. We talk about, this is what we wish we would have done earlier in life. This is what helped us later on in life and why we should have done it earlier. And the kids really can connect to that. We're Doug and I, yes, we're both white males, but we have very, very different backgrounds, in growing up, in our school, in education, in just, how we do life.
I say this quite a bit. The number one reason why people use the simplest of all reasons is because they work. Drugs work.
Yeah.
And that's a tough thing to try to get across. And what I try to draw the lines to showing is it wasn't weed that led to pills that led to heroin. It wasn't that gateway like that. It was trauma that I was trying to escape. And because I didn't know how to reach out to those resources, because I couldn't humanize authority figures in my life. I thought they were teachers. I thought they had these perfect lives. And I was embarrassed, and I was brought up with pride, and I'm a man. I got this. It was hard for me to understand that not every kid went through trauma the way I went through trauma. Again, it didn't mean that my life was bad. It was just once I became mature enough to understand really what was going on in my life, I felt defeated, and I had fears in my life that I was going to continue to lose people, and funerals were just going to always be a part of my life. And that bled out into other areas where I didn't even understand that my lack of talking with someone was affecting my sleep patterns, which was making me search out substances to try to cope with, those effects of trauma.
Well, and you don't just end it with the substance use. It's holistic. You talk about mental health. There's a family component, right?
Suicide, bullying, we talk about. And the neat thing about it, Doug and I are so well versed on so many topics. A lot of times we can come into the school and say, what are you guys really having a problem with? Is it vaping? Is it suicide? Is it bullying? Is it, alcohol use? And we can focus just a little bit more on those. And you bring up that family component. As an interventionist, I would work with families and get their loved ones to treatment. I've done about 115 interventions, 110 of them were successful. And afterwards, I would start working with the individuals when they come back for treatment as a coach to help them find sober housing, to find treatment, to jobs, to really start rebuilding areas of their lives. And I get a lot of parents that would say, "Can you help me do this too?"
Yes.
And I said, well, I'd love to. I was getting so busy. So I went out and found some of the best family coaches in the United States through Family Recovery Resources. So they do a program called the BALM, which is Be a Loving Year. And as much as I wanted to work with the families, I said, let's find one of the best professionals in the country that can do this. And the really nice thing about this program is once you purchase it, it's a year long. It's all online, web or phone calls. So it's done completely anonymous from your own home. If you miss calls, they're recorded. There's hundreds of pages of workbooks for it. And it's all really done like an online college course. So as you complete the different lessons and courses, you can move at your own pace as you want to. And if you miss them, you can always listen to them later. And for families, it'll really link them up with other individuals that are going through a lot of the same things in different phases. So you'll get individuals that are just starting and saying, my kids are going through active addiction. Well, some of them are saying, my kid's been clean for over a year and this is what's working. So it was all really founded off some of the Al-Anon principles, but Beverly Buncher, the owner, said, we can do better than, we can create a full program and continuum of care and curriculum for these families. And she did that. And families that purchase it have had absolutely amazing results with it. I remember I did an intervention for an individual and he was leaving treatment And he called his mom, and instead of his mom freaking out on him and yelling and everything, she was like, well, these are your choices. And she was that very loving and weird. And he ended up calling me up and said, what'd you do to my mom? He was so engaged in this program and teaching her, amping things up again with an addict usually doesn't work.
No.
So she just remained calm.
And having the understanding to explain to parents that their child is their addiction. And that's something that they need to be healthy with boundaries, and, just the way that they live their life is so important. When I got out of prison, I should say, when I went to prison, my mom sort of put herself in a prison too. Stopped talking to friends. She dove into work. 3 years later, I get out, and she didn't know how to allow herself to come out of prison. One, I was out for the first time and she was scared to death. Two, she had every worst thought, if I go back, am I going to survive? My mom always says that Doug has another high in him, but he doesn't have another recovery. And that's,
Ooh,
yeah, right. I think that's really a deep seed that I still hold in my heart. It's not a fear. It's just remembering those ripple effect moments that your act can cause. I think it goes a long way with understanding or supporting all avenues of recovery. Why Jake and I use two different reasons. Why we got clean, two different reasons. The recoveries that we work are different. A lot of overlapping similarities. But what works today doesn't always work tomorrow. When I ended up losing my company, I was experiencing rage for the first time in my life. And I remember going back to treatment and sitting down and really saying, like, I'm not here to talk about my dad's suicide. I'm not here to talk about prison. I'm here to talk about these emotions that I'm dealing with as a sober adult now, that my old coping mechanisms aren't addressing.
One of the really interesting things about jail is I learned this whole set of coping mechanisms through treatment, right? And, be able to exercise and hug family and reach out and call people, eat good food when you need to. And then all of a sudden you're thrown into jail and all those things are removed from your life. And all of a sudden I had to find a whole nother, set of coping skills. Eight and a half months into my recovery, because that's actually when I was sent out. 8.5 months clean when I was sent.
a lot of things will test your recovery along the way, right?
Yes.
I'll let you guys go with this because I'm sure this centers you, but while you talk, I'm sure, well, I know it's great. I can just tell from the energy. I know from listening to you guys that what you enjoy best is the after talks.
Absolutely.
We live for those.
Yeah, to be able to speak and have lines of kids come up to you afterwards and either say, I've learned a lot from this. I have these issues that I now want to talk about. My friends have these issues and they want to talk about them with me. That's what we do this for. Doug would always say, if we're doing this for one person, we're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And we're trying to hit a lot of people. We're trying to cast a really wide net and make our program relatable to just about every student that's out there.
It's also about being very honest. There is nothing that I say up on stage that is going to change a kid's life. I don't have some magic word. I don't get to change their home environment. But what I can do is let them know that there are people out there that will sit in the mess with you. Whether you have to cry or scream or just sit there in silence, you're not going to do it alone.
Hmm.
And that's not only giving someone, support to move forward in their problems, it's allowing others to say, this is how you help others. This is how you actively listen. This is how you go out and it's about kindness. It's about small random acts of hope. When I talk about changing the world, I'm not talking about the world. I'm talking the 3 minutes it takes some kid to walk from math class to science class.
Yep.
Right? That's the world that I'm trying to change. And if you take it a step further, this isn't about saving lives. This is about changing a system of care that is broken. And I use broken loosely because it had to work in the first place to be broken. Um, but again,
Yeah.
that's nobody's fault. This epic failure on war and drugs. I don't care who's to blame. I don't care why it happened. I care that we don't continue to live this way for the next 30 years, knowing that it's broken and being so afraid to call somebody out or to take a look at it, that we're not going to change our systems of care.
Great. The program is called, and the company is called Turning the Page. And those of you listening, you know that there's links to it at the blurb of the podcast. Thanks to the two of you for not only spending time with us, but for your work
Oh, thank you.
today. Yeah, it's great. I'm sure we'll run into each other a number of times. For those of you listening, we invite you to listen next time. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and stay involved.